So the next one is we're going to chat with Billy about Billy and Kylie. No surprises, Ben. It's not Billy and Kylie. We changed your names, but 43 and 41. This is from another one of our senior advisors, Stu Bartram. And there was a lot to really love and unpack about this story too. But here's the meta theme. If the meta theme on the first one, Ben, was not all lifestyle design is measured in dollars, the meta theme for this particular story is getting a look under the bonnet on the true price. And I say price not just in dollar terms, Ben, but the true price of get-rich-quick schemes. And this story is really going to detail that in some length. So let's rip in, just so we get to know these people. Billy and Kylie live in New South Wales. They're in their 40s. They've got two kids, 9 and 7. And Billy runs a litigation business. Okay. Here's the problems for the story that we want to tackle. Okay. First of all, circa 2013, Billy did a property development in a mining town. Pause for effect. And it went badly. So he did a property development in a mining town that didn't go so well. So after buying it, getting council approval, the plans drawn, they were in the knockdown stage, and the bank pulled the pin on the lending due to the market falling out. Ben, outside of their control. That's the worst bit. Imagine if you got the funding, you did the development, and then you actually realised the loss. Okay, but you weren't even able to get that far because the bank changed the parameters that you were working with. So Billy then had to sell the contract, and there was a huge loss of $500,000, folks.
Mate, $500,000, that's $500,000. So it's really, really challenging to be able to mentally come back from something like that. I mean, it would put a lot of pressure on the relationship. That's also true. Now, Bryce, just as I'm talking, you might hear that next door neighbours are doing a bit of construction work at the moment. So you might hear a bit of drilling as part of the audio on this particular pod, but we can't do anything about it. So we're just going to push on.
Yeah, a studio is pretty soundproof, but not when a jackhammer's going. But just kind of a juxtaposition, Ben. So anyone who's building these plans, they don't have to go into any development phase of their plan. It's all passive. But yeah, no, thanks for letting us know about that background noise. But 500,000 is, let's be honest, imagine just reflect, and if you're listening to this, just losing $100,000 would sting massively. So 5 times that is a lot. So they had some cash. At the time, 6 figures of cash, around 100K, but that was not nearly enough. So what happened is Billy and Kylie had to sell their home. So they lost everything. And then not only did they lose everything, it took 6 years for them to get back into the property market and buy the new home. So reflect on that, folks. To feel Billy and Kylie's pain, not only do you have to acknowledge the pain of what went on, but then you have to be reminded of it for over half a decade of that mistake. So there would be a sense of self that would be burning in here for Billy, and he reflected that he got caught up in the hype when attending seminars and tried to get rich quick, and this is his biggest single regret. Ben, do you know when you get those memes or those podcast references where someone says, here I interviewed people who were dying, and here's their top 5 regrets, and I put all their 5 regrets. It's kind of like this one here is obviously not as profound as dying, so let's be clear, but it gives you that opportunity to look in the rear vision mirror and go, this is my single biggest regret when it comes to investing, that I got caught up in a get-rich-quick scheme, which is why we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of hundred episodes saying we're a get-rich-slow opportunity rather than a get-rich-quick. But $500,000 large just because of that hype.
So, Bryce, this is a challenging story all around, right? So you've got a situation where Billy's, thinking about making the right decision. He's seeing proof of it in the seminars and all of the, sort of social media profiles and videos that are coming out. This is how much profit I made. And so this is a pathway to success. And very, very often you see young investors always being seduced by quick wins and quick returns, Whereas, for you and I, who it's not our first rodeo, in fact, we've done 3 decades of rodeoing in this particular space, we know that it's always going to pretty much move back to the regression to the mean, right? So if we keep that principle going, we've got a situation where if you also think about investment returns, the higher the risk, so risk-adjusted returns, the higher the risk you take, the better the returns are, but that's the trade-off. I mean, ultimately, in terms of Billy considering this opportunity, and I can really sympathise with Billy's situation, because it was the bank who pulled the rug. So he might have done all of his numbers, but not being able to get access to that debt was a real critical element for him. And so I think, the way in which I look at that is that, reconciling that was taken out of his control. So it wasn't ultimately just him, but also then by owning it, he's really now started to see that he can move on. If he continued to have a challenge with that and not own it, so by basically making and owning it is allowed him to move on. And now we're about to tell a really nice, sort of a sunrise moment after a really dark period, because they end up losing their house, and that's the house of cards falling. When you take on too much debt and you get too greedy in the property market, you can ultimately force that whole deck of cards down. Now, I'm not saying that that's Billy and Kylie's example. All I'm just basically talking about there is, don't be too when you want to be greedy, make sure you've got some financial stability behind you, and only risk a small portion. Never risk the entire farm, because ultimately that's what can happen. And that was an unfortunate event for Billy and Kylie.
Well, in Billy and Kylie's story, obviously we're talking about the dark side of their story, but there is definitely bright side, which is the point, right? Which is the point of what we're talking about here. But there was a couple of unknown things, unknown problems that were happening. The business was distracting them from their personal finances. So in the planning process, they weren't super clear on incomes, the type and amount from the business. So Stu had to encourage them to call the accountant and confirm what's pay as you go, what's business drawings. So there was a bit of a blind spot around that. So that was important to get some clarity, but also having line of sight and detail on their current loans. So what was the type of loan? Was it an offset versus redraw? What was the balance outstanding? How much was in offset? It was sort of reshifting their focus back to those basics, because that's part of cleaning house, right? And this, the team, and in chatting with Stu, he sees it a lot. He sees a lot of plans, right? So it's not uncommon for business owners who are focused on their business to have a bit of dilution, murky waters around what's business and what's personal. I think if you can get that delineation between business and personal, I think that's really important. And I wonder, as I was talking to Stu and reflecting on Billy and Kylie, when you've had an event like that's a traumatic event. When you lose your home, and then that puts relationship under stress, it's trauma, right? And so I wonder what sort of coping mechanisms were being employed here. And I reckon it could have been easy for Billy to go, well, it was my call that got us here, so therefore I'm just going to do whatever it takes. And you could easily just devote to the business, do whatever it takes. One, as a way to focus on getting back what's lost, but two, as a distraction as well, Ben, from some of the pain that comes from experiencing these real life events that people have some shame around and some guilt. And I'm sure the challenges that it does put on relationships is real. And so I just want to send a note to Billy that, mate, we get you. We get that you're having a swing to get ahead. It didn't work, and some of the toll that takes can have trauma impacts on us.
I think, Bryce, if I can pick up on the other part of what you were just talking about there before around when you're self-employed, you've got inconsistency in income. So a lot of the people who potentially want to invest in property, they do get quite concerned about that fluctuation in income, and so they don't take action. So what Stu was able to do for Billy and Kylie was to look at that income, sort it all out, start to get some patterns of reliable income that's in there, and then also then make some assumptions about some of the more lumpier income that might also be part of that particular story. And then once you got that, then once you've got the cash flows, then it is about sort of starting to think about the optimization overlaid by the risk and confidence profiling that we talk about in this particular case, but we also talked about recently in the James and Becky situation, right? So I think there's some really nuances here that hopefully we're teaching to the community around some of the roadblocks, some of the objection points, some of the challenges, but that they are overcomable in terms of you can overcome that type of situation in terms of what we're looking at. So where do we go to from here, Bryce?
All right, so it became really clear on what was at stake. All right, what if they got this wrong? They were really scared to make another mistake, and also they realised that they'd lost some time. To your point earlier, Ben, to be able to do this. So can't get that time back. Plus, scared of making mistakes. So the aha penny drop moment for them was, whilst they did have a strong borrowing capacity, they had modest cash flows. And if they wanted to make sure that they didn't repeat the sins of the past and scared not to go back and make that mistake, they really wanted to get some help. So the conclusion was a conservative approach with a long-term strategy to enjoy passive income at retirement. Ben, I really want to stop and pause here for our community. We do not get involved in hyperbole, hype. The information we presented for almost 10 years, Ben, and the plans that we present are certainly not aggressive. They're not risky. They achieve a very simple platform for people, is to create lifestyle by design. In some cases, 2,000 a week, plus or minus. But we want to be the people out in the marketplace on the back of the rise of the financial influencers episode we did a couple of weeks ago, Ben. We want to be the voice of reason in the market that says, if you want to take overly aggressive risks, we're not the podcast to listen to. There are other podcasts that you can do that. We actually want to help our clients and our community and our people who are listening on our podcast achieve the freedom whilst getting on with life and enjoying a little bit of lifestyle by design along the way. So I think that's important. They wanted to create a conservative approach with that long-term strategy to enjoy that passive income. So let's have a look at some of the nuts and bolts. They wanted to buy a new home for 1.3 million in the future, Ben. But what became clear was this was not financially feasible after workshopping the whole idea in the planning process. And this served as a reality check because they suspected that this might be the case, but they had that validated, which meant that they could get some closure on what that looks like. They have an existing PPR. The plan was to stay in their existing PPR and not get distracted by a new PPR, which, if they're already having challenges with cash flow, Ben, if you want to have more challenges with the cash flow, upgrade your home. That's 101. Want more cash flow challenges? Get a bigger house that costs you more. So whilst they were disappointed, and given what had happened previously, they absolutely did not want to put themselves in that compromised position. So with that strong borrowing capacity of 1.3, they decided to use it for investment properties, not a principal place of residence. And even considering their adjusted risk profile, Ben. So clearly risk profile early was super aggressive. Now it's a more conservative risk profile. So they were happy to not exercise the full 1.3 borrowing capacity. They decided to exercise that at 950, which then gave birth to two scenarios, Ben.
Yeah, and I think that would also be an element of confidence in the supply of that cash flow coming in. Again, when you're in your own business, you'll have some of that lumpy cash flow that's also coming through. So I think that makes a bit of sense to sort of have a more conservative element. I mean, I pick up on your point you were saying before, Bryce, about how conservative we are. We're naturally conservative because we're playing with other people's money. Like ultimately, it's not our money, right? And so we're humbled by the opportunity to serve the people that we do the model for, because at the end of the day, we're playing with their lives. We're playing with their life savings in some cases. So that's why it is important when you run an advisory business, as opposed to commenting about the risk you take and the money you've made, and then ultimately being risky with other people's money, is where we've seen so many problems occur over the 30 odd years that we've been watching these fly by the night, fly by the seat of their pants companies come, promote big property gains, and then within 10 years, the businesses are collapsed. And obviously lots of unhappy customers behind them. So that, I think, is a really important point. So Coming back to the scenario, in this particular case, this is the joy of doing modelling. So we modelled their situation in terms of age, income coming in. So we had one property, which was a 900 purchase, so a more significant asset. But then we also had two properties, one at 600 and then one at 500 later. And it was the yield that won the day for their particular situation. So remember what we said before, even though the bank would lend them more, because we did analysis on their current spending and lifestyle, that yield really mattered. And so we were able to sort of then say, okay, this year we'll buy the $600,000 property with a 6.5% growth target, 3.5% yield. And then IP number two, will come back for that in 2028 at a 500,000 in today's value terms, which will be extrapolated at a 4.5% compounding return. So we'll buy it at a future value in 2028 with a 4.5% growth and a 4.5% yield. So a bit of a balanced asset in terms of the importance for a cash cow, finishing off that, which means that will go to cash flow positive sooner. And then ultimately it will be about retiring that debt in a quicker manner.
Now, Ben, for those people that are discouraged in a similar situation, the good thing about this particular couple is they got back on the horse. So they bought their principal place of residence that they currently live in January 2021, right? So in prime sort of COVID times. And they've seen a very strong capital growth in a short period of time, as has anyone who's been on the property ladder during that time, which was circa 11% per annum. So that's a win. That's something that we need to bank for this couple because they want to have these incremental psychological wins along the way, given the mental scar of the past. So that's exciting. And as you've just detailed, there's a couple of investment properties. The trade-off was around yield. I think there's a real learning point for the community here. The suggestion to buy a more expensive property versus buying two, breaking that up to buy two smaller budgeted properties was a yield thing, and it harks back to if you go back to our original 20, Ben, when we talk about buying a property that's investment grade, it's investment grade price point for the particular investor. Because if you could go to, we often talk about if you go Peppermint Grove in WA or Toorak here in Victoria, or you go to Hamilton or Ascot in Brisbane or anywhere on the lower North Shore in Sydney, you could buy properties that would significantly increase your wealth once you buy them in 2024 and what they'd be worth in 2034. But the problem is you've got to get to 2034. If you can't hold your name on those titles for the decade, doesn't matter how much they go up in value, which is why investment grade is about price point as much as it is about the bricks and mortar and the location as well. So in this is a case in point that the investment grade price point for this particular couple wasn't 900K, whereas for some others it might be 900K. So that's important learning there.
Yeah, really important. I mean, I think, you always talk about that cash flow keeps you in, growth is what you take out.
Yep.
Right. And remembering, even if we don't sell those properties in retirement, we're still taking that growth out in a sort of a theoretical way, because with that growth comes higher rental that we're able to receive for that higher value property over time. So, but in this particular case, cash flow was tied early on. And so it was a sensible decision to diversify and break up that risk, get that higher yield at that lower price point, and then ultimately, happy days in terms of how we then sail through towards our North Star to be able to land the plane in terms of retiring that debt out and ultimately living off the passive income.
Now, Ben, one of the joys that I get to do spending my week is I'm very close with our property wealth planning team, and I get to work with them as they craft the way that they have the conversations with the people that they get the privilege of serving when they come and put their hand up and say we'd like some help. And Stu talked about this with this particular couple because the environment that he was able to create is something I'm really proud of, where it became a safe space to talk about what had happened in the past, because sometimes healing comes from bringing the darkness into the light in a place of trust, right? And again, we've touched on this, but I really want to speak to the people who can resonate with this, who are listening. When you go through an event that this couple have gone through, there is a lot of bark that gets taken off you. You can lose your confidence, you can lose self-esteem, all the internal stuff that you don't get to see when you see these people at barbecues, when you see them out having a drink, having dinner with their friends. It's that internal chatter that's going on. So the opportunity to talk with an experienced advisor about the mistake that they made in the past, deal with that, bring it into an open environment, acknowledge it, shine the light on it that it needs to say that's part of your history, but it doesn't have to define who you are, and then we can move forward. They had a face-to-face meeting in the office with Stu, and then it gave them the opportunity to deal with that and then just move on without sort of being defined by that past. And I really love that. So they'd lost time, but they didn't want to lose any more time, because we know that that's the secret sauce. So end result, Ben, was looking pretty good for them.
Yeah, it was. I mean, if you think about what their target is, it's another story of 90,000, retiring at around 2044. So they've chosen an earlier retirement, 63 and 61. So, obviously, if they kept working, that income in retirement would continue to keep magnifying and compounding. So net worth in future value terms, 7.96, nest egg 4.3 million, present value of that nest egg 2.65. Debt free by 2041. So that's a nice little story, 2 years before they enter in retirement. So that is very, very helpful. And then, which when you think about where they started from and effectively the big step backwards that they had to take to now move multiple steps forward as part of that particular story is a really nice closing out message in terms of they've moved past the fear of that public opinion or that rejection or that fear of failure that they've had, and ultimately are now starting to think about that as much as it was, they can take it on as a massive learning lesson, but it doesn't have to define who they are. And I think that's a really powerful message for anyone who finds themselves in a situation where they've been kicked in the guts and not being able to get back up. What we've seen here with Billy and Kylie is they've stuck it together. They were very, very powerful in sticking it together, and they got out the other side. So I think that's a really nice story where they've got their principal place of residence, they've got 2 investment properties, so they've got those rocks in the jar, and that ultimately puts them in a great position.
Yeah, but here's the transformation. This was a reset strategy. This was a reset of their lifestyle
Yeah.
by design, which is important. They got to put the past behind them, and they used that strong emotion of the previous mistake to ensure that they got the best outcome for their roadmap for the future. So remember, we talked the decision for them to not upgrade their principal place of residence was the catalyst to ensure that they got the early retirement, which was their number one goal in retirement. So, and again, you can only get clarity from doing what ifs on paper. We call it paper trading your life before actually doing it in execution. So, good story. So, in chatting with Stu, there was a couple of wrap up notes.
Could I just
Before
make
I go
one
there,
more
Ben.
point there, Bryce? I think it's probably also, having been in this space for many, many years myself, we shouldn't underestimate the power of getting in control of their money. So remember when Bryce was talking about the backstory there, that they really didn't know what sort of lending they had and they didn't really have a grasp of their personal financial situation. That in itself is the crux of building foundations on top of. So if you now they've got their finances organized, and so that should also be a huge value add as part of this story, because if you don't get your finances in order, and if you don't then work out how to have a system to manage that, then the rest will just naturally fall over, right? If you don't build it on the right foundations. And so, again, a credit to Billy and Kylie in terms of, addressing the fact that they didn't really have their finances in order. Getting those in order is going to give them the greatest chance of success.
Yeah, nice one. Very good. So Stu had these final words to say. That here are some of his observations throughout the whole planning process. At first, Billy found it hard to admit those mistakes. Right. So this did mess with his sense of self and self-esteem. Right? Didn't
I
want
understand.
to divulge it initially, and it was a really raw point that stung really hard. But then here's the bit that's amazing. They're both aligned and wanting to move forward, right? The relationship was strained, having lost the home, but Becky was very stoic through a tough time, and props to her. And it took a massive
Absolutely.
toll on their trajectory. But I want Billy and Becky and everyone here to know that this is a good news story. This
Yeah,
is a good
finishes
news story.
positively.
It's
Yeah.
very, very positive on the background of something that was a dark day for them. Now, here's where further upside comes, Ben. It's not one and done. It's a living, breathing evolution of the planning process because with some of that clarity and some of that sense of purpose and some of that renewed self-esteem for this couple, well, then their business might start to thrive even more, which means that they might get more income that comes in, which means that they can pay down debts faster. So it's not never ever are we saying that those goals can't be achieved for upgrading the home. But what we are saying is based on where we are now, here's a believable plan with a North Star that you can follow that can get you excited every day about what you're doing and help you forget the past. Inheritances, lotto wins, business success, all those sorts of stuff, gets factored in from this point forward. So I just wanted to really sort of lean into that for the community. It is something that you want to include, transcend, and include always. It's like when you get your phone, Ben. Every now and then you get to upgrade the software, and something new happens. We want to encourage everyone who's ever had a plan with us, and everyone who's considering, and everyone who's creating their own plan, to understand you're making decisions based on what you have right now in the moment, but you're always looking to ratchet and iterate over time based on you trapping more surplus than you'd plan to, based on getting more income than you'd plan to, based on having resources that were available. But the idea is you're ratcheting up, Ben, and avoiding, and the whole idea of ratcheting means that there's no big drop and fall back to the ways of the past.
Yeah, you're looking at your instrument panel as you're driving towards this future direction and the plan that you've created, and you're checking in on those instruments. All of a sudden, to your point, if there's more income coming in, there's more fuel in the car, so we can go further. Or we can basically increase our acceleration and get to that destination a little bit quicker. You're looking at the debt instruments. You're looking at the cash flow trapping. You're getting yourself you're looking at your oil temperature. You're looking at the way in which the engine's performing, and ultimately from that you can then adjust course. You can speed up, slow down accordingly. And I think that's, the plan is that starting point. It gives you the roadmap to the destination that you're on. And then you continue looking at wealth speed, wealth clock, passive income, spending habits, debt reduction. All of those things are part of the gauges that we have available in terms of you continuing to tick off, those kilometres along the journey to get to the end destination.
Well done, folks. Well done, Billy. Well done, Kylie. It's you guys should be really stoked with
Yeah,
yourself
you should be proud of yourself, guys.
for doing that. I'm super impressed, and I just want to remind everyone of the Association of Super Funds of Australia, Ben, the ASFA's estimate of how much money you'll need in retirement, depending on your lifestyle. For a couple, modest is $46,994. For a couple, comfortable, it's $72,148. If you're single, modest, it's $32,665, and if you're single, comfortable, it's $51,278. Ben, that was as per the December quarter of 2023, so it's about 6 months old. Now, here's a couple of definitions for everyone. The modest standard estimates how much is needed for the basics. The comfortable standard estimates how much money is needed for retirees to be involved in a range of leisure activities and have a good standard of living, including private health insurance, a reasonable car, household goods, and holidays. So just the reason I brought that up, Ben, is both of these particular couples' plan was to have $90,000 in passive income. So the comfortable standard was 72. So they're what's that? It's going to be an extra almost 30% greater than the ASFA standard, just because they made a change and got what they wanted.
About $400 a week, Bros.
Yeah, it's enormous. So, folks,
That's material.
$2,000 per week will get you into a position that gives you way more choices than a lot of people will be having. So, props to you. So, well done to both of these case studies. Thanks for Polly and Stu for sharing them.